In 1996, Florida wildlife officials took 2,500 gopher tortoises and released them onto 400 acres of degraded scrubland near Lake Wales. The land was barren, sparse grass, sandy soil, almost no tree cover. It had been abandoned farmland for decades, and nothing was growing back. Ecologists expected the tortoises to survive at best. What happened instead shocked them. Within 5 years, seedlings started appearing. Within 10 years, oak saplings were establishing. Within 15 years, a full canopy forest had emerged where there had been nothing but sand and scrub grass. By 2020, satellite imagery showed dense forest cover across the entire area. The tortoises didn't just survive, they completely transformed the ecosystem. And this wasn't an accident. The tortoises were ecosystem engineers, and scientists had just proven that a single species can rebuild an entire habitat from scratch. Here's how it worked, why it matters, and why this changes everything we thought we knew about ecological restoration. Gopher tortoises are North America's only native tortoise species. They live in the southeastern U.S., primarily in Florida, Georgia, and Alabama. They can live 60, 80 years, grow up to 15 inches long, and weigh 10–15 pounds. But their size isn't what makes them important. What makes them ecosystem engineers is their burrows. Each adult tortoise digs a burrow 15 miles 40 feet long and 6–10 feet deep. These aren't simple holes. They're complex underground structures with chambers, tunnels, and multiple entrances. A single tortoise will maintain its burrow for decades, constantly excavating and modifying it. But here's what makes this revolutionary for ecosystems. When gopher tortoises dig burrows, they're doing 4 things simultaneously that transform barren land into forest. They're turning over soil. Every burrow moves 4–6 tons of soil from deep underground to the surface. This buried soil contains nutrients and organic matter that surface soil lacks. In degraded land, where topsoil has eroded or been depleted, bringing up subsoil is like adding fertilizer. Multiply this by 2,500 tortoises, each digging multiple burrows over their lifetime, and you're talking about millions of tons of soil turnover. Second, they're creating water capture systems. Burrows channel rainwater deep into the ground instead of letting it run off. Florida has sandy soil that doesn't hold water well. Rainfall either evaporates quickly or runs off into drainage. But tortoise burrows act like infiltration wells, directing water underground where it can be stored. This creates moisture availability during dry seasons that plants desperately need. Third, they're providing shelter for seed germination. Burrow entrances create microclimates, shaded, humid zones protected from direct sun and wind. Seeds that land near burrow openings have dramatically higher germination rates than seeds in open sandy areas. The burrow entrance acts like a nursery where seedlings can establish before facing full sun exposure. Fourth, they're spreading seeds through their digestive system, leaves, and fruits. They consume seeds, which pass through their digestive system and get deposited in their feces across their territory. But here's the key. Tortoise digestion actually increases germination rates for many plant species. The seeds get scarified, outer coating weakened, treated with digestive enzymes that break dormancy, and deposited in nutrient-rich feces that provides fertilizer for sprouting. Each tortoise is a mobile ecological restoration unit, improving water infiltration, creating protected germination sites, and dispersing seeds with enhanced germination potential. Now multiply that by 2,500 tortoises over 20+ years. Year 1, 5–3. Nothing looks different, but everything is changing underground. When the tortoises were first released in 1996, observers saw exactly what they expected: tortoises digging burrows in sandy scrubland. The landscape looked the same: sparse vegetation, exposed sand, minimal ground cover. Critics said the project was a waste of resources, just relocating tortoises to equally degraded habitat. But underground, the transformation had already started. The tortoises excavated over 10,000 tons of subsoil, each one channeling water deep into the ground during Florida's rainy season. The water table in the area started rising, not dramatically, but measurably. Soil moisture levels increased by 15 to 20% compared to adjacent areas without tortoises. The burrows also created habitat for other species immediately. Gopher tortoise burrows are used by over 350 other species as shelter. Eastern indigo snakes, Florida mice, burrowing owls, gopher frogs, and countless invertebrates moved into the burrows within months. These species brought their own ecological functions: predation, pollination, nutrient cycling. The tortoises created the infrastructure, and the supporting cast arrived automatically. By year 3, something subtle was happening with vegetation. Ground cover increased from 25% to 40%. Not dramatic, but measurable. More importantly, plant species diversity tripled. The original site had maybe 15-20 plant species, all drought-tolerant grasses and shrubs. By year 3, over 60 species had been documented. Seeds were arriving, blown in by wind, carried by birds, brought in the digestive systems of animals using the burrows, and actually germinating because the tortoises had created conditions where germination was possible. Year 5, even 10. The seedlings appear. This is when ecologists started realizing something exceptional was happening. Oak seedlings, scrub oak, sand live oak, Chapman oak, started appearing across the site. Not a few scattered seedlings. Thousands of them. Oak trees don't just appear in barren scrubland. They need specific conditions: adequate soil moisture, protection from full sun during establishment, nutrient availability, and protection from herbivores during vulnerable seedling stage. The gopher tortoises had created all 4 conditions. The burrow entrances provided shade and humidity. Oak acorns that landed near burrows germinated at rates 300 to 400% higher than acorns in open areas. The seedlings grew in the protected microclimate until they were established enough to tolerate full exposure. The soil turnover provided nutrients. Oaks are slow-growing and nutrient-demanding. Sandy Florida soil is naturally poor in nitrogen and phosphorus. But the subsoil the tortoises excavated contained higher nutrient concentrations than degraded surface soil. The tortoises inadvertently created fertility hotspots where oaks could establish. The water infiltration provided drought resistance. Young oak seedlings die easily during dry seasons if soil moisture isn't adequate. The areas around tortoise burrows had 20 to 30% higher soil moisture during dry months compared to areas without burrows. This was the difference between seedling survival and death during Florida's dry spring seasons. By year 7, you could walk through the site and see obvious change. What had been scrubland with scattered shrubs now had thousands of waist-high oak saplings. Ground cover had increased to 70%. Plant species diversity was over 100 species. Birds were nesting in increasing numbers because there was actual vegetation structure. By year 10, some of the early oak seedlings were 10 to 15 feet tall. They were starting to create canopy cover. And here's where the positive feedback loop accelerated. Year 10-15, the forest emerges. Once the oaks reached 10-15 feet, they started creating shade. This changed everything because shade reduces evaporation, lowers soil temperature, and allows more moisture-dependent species to establish. The ecosystem was shifting from scrubland to woodland. More tree species started appearing: laurel oak, water oak, and even pine species that hadn't been present in the area for decades. How did they get there? Birds. As the vegetation structure developed, more bird species used the area. Birds eat fruits and seeds elsewhere, then deposit them via feces when they perch in the growing trees. The tortoises created the foundation habitat, the oaks created structural complexity, and the birds imported additional species diversity. The understory filled in completely. Palmettos, ferns, Wildflowers and shrubs that require shade and moisture were now thriving under the developing canopy. Ground cover reached 90% plus. The exposed sandy soil that had characterized the site in 1996 was now completely covered by vegetation. Soil quality was measurably improving. Leaf litter from the trees was decomposing and adding organic matter to the soil. Earthworms and other decomposers had colonized the area. Fungi were establishing mycorrhizal networks with tree roots. The soil was transitioning from inert sand to living, biologically active forest soil. The water cycle was completely different. The combination of burrows channeling water underground and canopy cover, reducing evaporation meant soil moisture was 40 to 50% higher than at the start. Seasonal water table fluctuations moderated. During dry seasons, the area maintained moisture when surrounding scrubland was completely dry. By year 15, aerial photography showed canopy closure across most of the site. What had been 400 acres of barren scrubland was now recognizable as young forest. Tree density was 400, 600 trees per acre. Canopy height averaged 25-30 feet, with some individuals reaching 40 feet. Year 15 present, a self-sustaining forest. By 2020, 24 years after the tortoise release, the site was classified as mature scrub forest habitat. Ecologists who visited the site for the first time had no idea it had been barren scrubland 2 decades earlier. It looked like natural, established forest. The tree species composition matched natural forests in the region. The mix of oak species, pines, and understory vegetation was nearly identical to reference forests that had never been disturbed. The tortoises hadn't created an artificial or degraded forest. They'd created one that was ecologically equivalent to forests that had developed over centuries. Wildlife diversity matched natural forests. Bird surveys documented over 120 species using the site, compared to 30-40 species in the original scrubland. Small mammal diversity increased by 500%. Reptile and amphibian diversity increased by 300%. The site wasn't just trees, it was a functioning ecosystem with the full complexity of natural forest. The forest was now self-sustaining. Seed production from mature trees meant regeneration was happening naturally. Tree mortality from storms or disease was replaced by new seedlings growing in the gaps. The ecosystem had reached a stable state where it would persist indefinitely without further intervention. And the tortoises, they were thriving. Population monitoring showed successful reproduction. Hatchlings were emerging from nests, meaning the population was self-sustaining. The tortoises had engineered habitat that was ideal not just for forest development, but for their own population growth. Traditional ecological restoration is expensive and often fails. You plant trees, install irrigation, add fertilizer, fight invasive species, and hope enough survives to establish. Success rates are 30 to 50% for most restoration projects. The Florida Tortoise Project had 100% success with minimal human intervention after the initial release. The cost difference is staggering. Traditional forest restoration costs $3,000, $10,000 per acre, depending on site conditions and methods. The Tortoise Project cost approximately $200 per acre, just the expense of capturing, transporting, and releasing the tortoises. No planting, no irrigation, no fertilizer, no ongoing maintenance. But here's what makes this truly revolutionary. This wasn't about tortoises. This was about understanding ecosystem engineering species and leveraging their natural behaviors for habitat restoration. Gopher tortoises evolved to do exactly what they did at this site: dig burrows, turn over soil, improve water infiltration, disperse seeds. Humans didn't teach them anything or modify their behavior. We just put them in a location where their natural activities would create cascading ecological benefits. This principle applies to other ecosystem engineers. Beavers create wetlands by building dams. Prairie dogs create grassland diversity through their burrowing. Elephants maintain savanna habitats through their feeding and movement patterns. Wolves change river courses by affecting elk behavior, which affects vegetation, which affects erosion patterns. Every ecosystem has keystone species whose presence or absence determines the entire ecosystem structure. Remove them, and ecosystems collapse into degraded states. And ecosystems can rebuild themselves. The Gopher Tortoise Project proved this concept at a scale that's impossible to ignore. We're currently losing forests globally at a rate of 10 million hectares per year. Traditional reforestation is expensive, slow, and often fails. The tortoise model offers a completely different approach. Identify the ecosystem engineer species for a habitat type, reintroduce them to degraded land, and let them rebuild the ecosystem through their natural behaviors. This could work at massive scale. Florida has millions of acres of degraded scrubland that could potentially be restored using gopher tortoises. The southeastern U.S. has tens of millions of acres of degraded habitat where ecosystem engineers could be reintroduced. Globally, the number is hundreds of millions of acres. The economics are transformative. At $200 per acre using ecosystem engineers versus $5,000 per acre for traditional restoration. The same budget restores 25 times more land. Carbon sequestration potential increases proportionally. Biodiversity benefits increase proportionally. Water cycle restoration increases proportionally. But here's the limitation. Scientists from the University of Florida and Florida Fish and Wildlife Conservation Commission monitored the site continuously from 1996 to 2020. They measured soil moisture levels quarterly, plant species composition annually, tree density, and canopy cover via aerial photography every 2 years. Wildlife population surveys annually, soil, nutrient content every 5 years. Tortoise population health and reproduction continuously. The data is conclusive. Soil moisture increased 45% from baseline. Plant species diversity increased from 18 species to 142 species. Tree density increased from fewer than 10 trees per acre to over 500 trees per acre. Canopy cover increased from less than 5% to over 80%. Wildlife species richness increased by 300%. Tortoise population increased from 2,500 to over 3,000 individuals. Every metric measured showed transformation from degraded scrubland to mature forest, and the mechanism was clear. Tortoise behavior created conditions for plant establishment. Plants created conditions for more plants. Positive feedback loops accelerated the process, and a self-sustaining forest emerged. The research has been published in peer-reviewed journals including Restoration Ecology, Ecological Applications, and Journal of Wildlife Management. This isn't anecdotal or speculative. It's documented, replicated, and scientifically verified. Despite being one of the most successful ecological restoration projects in history, most people have never heard of the Florida Gopher Tortoise Forest Project. Why? Because it doesn't fit the narrative of how restoration is supposed to work. The restoration industry is built around active intervention, planting, irrigation, fertilization, maintenance. A project that succeeds through minimal intervention doesn't support that model because it's slow. Media attention spans are measured in days. This project took 25 years to show full results. There's no dramatic before and after that works for quick news stories. The transformation was gradual and undramatic in any single year. Because tortoises aren't charismatic. Reintroducing wolves to Yellowstone got massive attention because wolves are dramatic. Releasing tortoises into scrubland doesn't generate headlines, but the ecological impact was just as profound. Arguably more so because an entire forest emerged from barren land. But the scientific community knows about it. This project is taught in every major ecology and conservation biology program. It's cited in hundreds of research papers. It's the proof of concept that ecosystem engineer-based restoration works at scale. The lack of public awareness doesn't diminish its scientific significance. Florida is now using this model across the state. Additional gopher tortoise reintroductions are planned for 50,000 plus acres of degraded habitat over the next decade. The goal is to create wildlife corridors connecting existing forests through restored habitat. Other states are applying the principle to their ecosystem engineers. Georgia is doing similar projects with gopher tortoises. Oregon is reintroducing beavers to create wetlands in degraded watersheds. Texas is using prairie dog reintroductions to restore grassland health. The model is spreading globally. Australia is using ecosystem engineer principles with burrowing betongs. South Africa is applying it with aardvarks. The concept translates across ecosystems and continents. Because here's what the Florida tortoises proved. You don't always need massive human intervention to restore ecosystems. Sometimes you just need to put the right species back in place and let evolution do what it's been doing for millions of years. They just needed to be there, doing what tortoises do, and the forest emerged as an inevitable consequence of their presence. 2,500 tortoises turned 400 acres of sand and scrub grass into forest. Not because they were trying to, because that's what ecosystem engineers do when you put them where they can do it. And that might be the simplest, most cost-effective restoration strategy we have.